we have a guest tonight, and I want to read a little bit about our guest. And his name is Omari Malik. So, Omari was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, and his story is one of both tragedy and triumph. He lost his father at 7 years old and turned to comic books because his father was a comic collector. So he turned to comic books and music as an outlet. When he was 17, he moved to New York to attend college. So he pulled a J. Cole, and he was ended up getting a bachelor's degree and a master's degree and entered the corporate world as an insurance broker. But, you know, most people want to be creative, enjoy being creative, and Omari does as well. And so when he wasn't fulfilled in his job, he started this company, Blacktooth Publishing, where he is putting out original comic book stories. And so he's got a Kickstarter going right now, and we're going to talk all about it. But I'll let him sort of talk about himself. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Omar Malik.
What's up, man? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. It's so funny that you say J. Cole because I went to St. John's.
Word.
Like, it's literally hilarious that you say Cole because I actually was a freshman at St. John's when 2014 Forest Hill Drives came out.
Mm-hmm.
Performed on campus, had everybody going crazy, which is insane because I was not a Cole fan until then. I grew up in Virginia, so I was a trap fan. I was raised on Gucci and Waka, but that got me into conscious rap.
Word. That's funny. See, I'm from North Carolina. I still live in North Carolina. And I was in college. I was a senior? No, I was a sophomore in college when Drake and J. Cole kind of rose to prominence at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the story was, oh, he was from North Carolina, he moved to New York, and my brother was actually friends or roommates with one of J. Cole's like best friends.
Word.
So I kind of had like not a front row seat. I'd ever met the man or anything, but I was put onto his stuff early. So I became a fan pretty quickly. But I was an East Coast hip hop head anyway, so it worked out.
I grew up in Virginia. I was a trap fan, man. I like, as if people can't tell, heavily influenced by hip hop from the jewelry to kind of the influence of like the way I write stories and kind of tell stories. So it's funny that we also start talking about music and even our conversations beforehand and talking about sneakers and things like that.
Right. Absolutely. Yo, Tayshawn is from Virginia. You're from Richmond.
Yeah, Richmond, Virginia.
And I think Tayshawn's from like the Norfolk area, Norfolk, Virginia Beach.
Shout out to the 757, man.
Word. Speaking of music, Tayshawn used to work for No Malice of the Clips.
Oh shit, yo.
That's cool stuff. But yeah, so I didn't know of Omari before he reached out for the interview, but Omari's got a really dope story, and he sent me a preview copy. Where did I put the book? I've been cleaning up in the office.
No worries. I have mine right here, man.
Okay. Mine is, oh, here it is. I put it on the other table. So he sent me a preview copy of this. This is Blacktooth Battalion. And this is the book that's being kickstarted right now. And it's basically a collection of 3 one-shot comics, right? And so the images that you were seeing on this overlay right here, these are the individual books. So there's adastra. Is that how you say that?
Yeah, adastra, snakebite, and dogpile.
Word. So I was fortunate enough to be able to read Dogpile before we got on this stream. And I plan on reading one of these one-shot issues each week because we're going to be spotlighting this campaign all month until he gets to the goal. And Dogpile was really dope, right? Why don't you tell them what Dogpile's about?
I appreciate that, man. So I guess the long story of Dogpile is kind of inspired by an African folktale. And when I say inspired, like long story, like the basis of the folktale is just a man had a bunch of animals that were kind of looking out for him. So I just kind of took that concept and just was like, that's cool. Like, what if a guy had animals that were kind of looking out for him and was kind of alone? And I guess you could say it's kind of like a mystery, sort of like a revenge story, but just like a man that really didn't have a family, really didn't have anyone around him, and kind of found that within animals, kind of found that within dogs, and you know, I tell people his powers are kind of like bruja, like magic, you know, kind of voodoo and things like that. But most importantly, and like the story to me is going to be very mental. You know, hopefully, I hope you kind of picked up on it. Like a
Mhm.
lot of his biggest challenges are, you know, him getting over his grief, him getting over his trauma, him learning to connect with people outside of the dogs, and even being able to really trust the dogs and kind of not be everywhere all at once and things like that.
Right, right. It's funny in the pitch for the book or for Dogpile, you basically say like, "Yo, if you're a fan of DMX, then you'll enjoy this book." And with that in mind, I read the book, and I couldn't get that out of my head, like because even as you're telling the story yourself, right? This kid who's like kind of grows up without family and kind of just become finds himself attached to dogs and can only relate to the dogs. Like that's the story of DMX, right?
Yeah, so I definitely a big X influence, and I actually saw. So as you mentioned, you know, I lost my father when I was 7, so there's a little bit of that element within it, like with me latching on the comic books and Quan kind of latching on the dogs because comic books were one of the last things I kind of got from my dad. It was like literally he died, and obviously everybody's going through stuff and trying to figure things out. And it's like the one thing that people kind of didn't want or nobody was kind of looking for was all the long boxes. So those
Mhm.
are just for me, and you know, wanting to be close to my dad and hearing people talk about him being into that stuff, I ate it up. You know, I was digging through those long boxes every day, looking at the covers like all over the place. So that mixed in with another memory from my father is when I was 5 years old, my dad took me to see DMX live. Like
Mhm.
DMX did like a free show in Richmond, and I went. It was literally right around the time up in here came out, still had the VHS cassette that he recorded. Like, so
Mhm.
I'm a big X fan, and I actually was working on a book before X passed, but it was just like kind of wanting that element to be with Quan because you know from watching X interviews and just you know thinking about myself as a person you know that deals with grief or deals with trauma or anybody that's went through something, they're kind of soft spoken.
Mhm.
To other people they might seem big and kind of over the top, and even with some of his dogs being big and domineering, but it's like at the end of the day a lot of people that have that demeanor are kind of soft, kind of within themselves, you know, aren't as trustworthy, but you know have a lot going on and a lot of love to give.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. So Dogpile follows the story of Quan, who we don't well, I don't want to spoil anything, but basically Quan clearly comes from a troubled past of some sort. And we find the story opens up with him kind of coming back to his hometown with his dogs, and for whatever reason he's on a mission to like do right by the world. And so there's a couple different situations where Quan could just be like a passerby or like an observer and decides to kind of throw himself into the middle of some action to defend people who can't necessarily defend themselves. Um, yeah, I loved the ending, right? I loved the situation that he throws himself toward the end of the book. But there's also a moment at the beginning of the book, like this initial confrontation, that I just found really uh, funny in a lot of ways, right? And so, without spoiling like the whole thing, my man is in the park with his dogs, and somebody's like, "Hey, can I buy your dog for my little girl?" And I'll let you guys guess how that confrontation ended up. But that was one of my favorite parts of the book as well. It was just it kind of came out of nowhere, but it was just like the audacity of some people.
So I'm glad you got it, and that was one of the things that I've. So you know, we're both comic fans, and one of the
Mhm,
things that I've tried to identify is like not to say I'm trying to write black books and being like this is a book that only black people can relate to, but
mhm,
something that I've kind of noticed about books, even though they have black protagonists and things like that, like. I've never really seen situations that I couldn't explain. Like I told, like you mentioned, I was in corporate America, and when all the George Floyd stuff was going on, obviously there were a bunch of you know healing zooms and you know talk about your issues, we're trying to hear you, we're trying to understand and things like that, but it was really difficult for me to kind of articulate a lot of those situations to people that wouldn't see them. And then when I looked up thought about books that I read, I was like, I've never like you hear things and you know and see them like, well, you don't really get it or you know characters lashing out and things like that, but it's not a moment that like you kind of wouldn't understand unless you look like us. And
Right.
that's kind of really what I wanted to get across without being preachy, without it being, too up in your face or without it being too much. But it's one of those things where, I just turned 26, and when you live this long, after a while, you kind of become numb to him, which is why it doesn't completely ruin his day.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost doesn't feel like something that he hasn't heard or seen before. Like it's just a moment where it's like, this again, you know?
Right. Right. So yeah, it was funny because you're right, right? Like and part of my comics journey had been like I didn't start reading comics till 2019. Like I had been around comics. Like my grandmother used to live in New York, so I'd go there for the summers and we'd get comics then. But even then, I was like mostly interested in them for the pictures. But when I sort of rediscovered comics a few years back, one of the things that really got me deep into it was Milestone. And you're right in that most comics featuring people of color don't necessarily dive into what I would call black issues, right? Like even a couple years ago when there was that whole thing with the dude in Central Park watching the birds and whatever, they did this whole issue of it was called DC Represent, and basically the dude has like this is terrible. But the dude has like these like racism binoculars. He starts looking in through the binoculars and seeing injustice, and it's just like it was terrible. But it was like it had to be a special event. They had to make like a special anthology book to like point out, hey, like racism happens sometimes.
Yeah.
It was weird.
That's what I mean when it's like when you go through it so much, you kind of become numb to it, and then it's like not to I guess the area that Quan kind of lives in, and to give people a little bit more backstory, is kind of like inspired by like Detroit and kind of urban cities, that kind of toe the line between being a city and kind of suburban. Because I've lived in Chicago for a minute and things like that. So, or even being up here in New York, a lot of things happen, and you kind of get those microaggressions that
Mhm.
aren't as up in your face, but it's still something that's a uniquely black experience, and for other races that go through it, something that's only particular to people that look like you and feel like you.
Right. Right. And so it's like I don't and I think Tayshawn says it really well, right? Like I appreciate the sentiment, but it's a lot after a while, right? Like going through
Exactly. Is
the
in
sensitivity trainings, all that.
Yeah, so like I said, and well, just to give a little bit more background on like that corporate thing, like I guess that might have been one of the moments where I literally was like explaining to my team and things like that. People are sending Zoom messages like, "Oh my God, George Floyd! Like, you guys are gonna get Juneteenth off and things like that." And I was like, one of the things that kind of hurts most coming into this office every day is everybody looking at me.
Mhm.
And they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, if I walked, I was like, I wear a do rag anytime. I brush my hair. I have waves. I wear a do rag a lot. If I
Mhm.
walk in the office with my do rag and street clothes on, I look like a threat. When I walk in the office with my suit on, I also look like a threat. It's like, everybody else can, do whatever they want, kind of curse a little bit more than other people, but it's like everybody always kind of looks like me. And it's
Mhm.
like, if there was anything that I would want out of this situation, it's like, just want to chill, man. I just want to let my hair down and just be able to exist,
Right.
without being black XYZ or black, the black insurance broker, or the black guy on Wall Street. It's just like, no, just a guy, you know,
Right.
because
Yeah.
when I'm back home in Brooklyn, I'm just a guy. Like,
Word. Yeah, nah, it's interesting. Because I mean I got promoted here recently and I'm like in a pseudo management position. And I constantly find myself like checking my tone because people always like assume that I'm saying something bad about them. If I'm like, hey, this process is inefficient, or why would we do that versus this? Like it always comes across the wrong way to people.
that was that same corporate friction. I'm a thinker, and
Hmm.
part of the reason why I got into comics was I was just thinking of like, oh, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of Supermans and others and non-Supermans and Batmans that aren't Batmans, and always thinking like when I've been working in jobs and it's like, all right, so why are we doing this? Why?
Hmm.
Like, oh, okay, they told us to do it, but like we could do it sooner. Like, why don't we do an Excel pivot instead of like doing this by hand? And it's
Mhm.
like when I would ask questions, it's like, why are you asking this question? Like it feels aggressive that I'm asking this question, or like asserting that things can maybe be done easier and things
Mhm.
like that. So
Yeah, his work. My man Fourth Wall or Danny's here. Danny is also an independent comics creator. Danny, funny, I'm wearing his hat. Danny's the co-creator of Ace Blade.
oh
Um,
word, yeah, I've definitely heard of that.
where yeah, Danny likes to travel to cons, so y'all might have seen each other at a time or two. Although Danny like hates big cons for some reason.
Nah, I
But
get it, man. And New York Comic Con was a whirlwind. So like
mm,
for people that are going to click on my Kickstarter now, I did a bunch of networking. So a whirlwind in a sense, ran into Todd McFarlane, ran into Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo, and all types of people. But it was one of those things where I was literally exhausted after being there all 4 days.
right, right. Yeah, no, I saw the pictures, man. He man, Omari made the most of New York Comic Con. He's got photos with DMC, not Jim Lee, but Scott Snyder, Greg
Yeah.
Capullo, so many
And,
people.
and the DL, bumped into everybody. Was trying to, I was telling people, being a politician, shaking hands, kissing babies.
Right, right. Um, so we talked about Daquan's backstory and we dove a little bit into your backstory. Pardon me for being a terrible interviewer,
Listen,
but
all good.
I do want to know more about like sort of what led you to be like, all right, let me write comics, and I want to know more about like what stories you wanted to tell through Blacktooth.
I tell people Blacktooth is 2 years in the 2 years and like a lifetime in the making. And I say a lifetime because I've always been in the comics. Like I said, the real love probably started really around my when my dad passed, as far as like picking up books and versus just ignoring those long white boxes. But
Mhm.
I was that kid that was had the Batman pajamas. Like I was a marketing person's dream because if you
Mhm.
put on a TV show and you had a toy attached to it, I was into it. Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Beyblade, Static Shock,
Mm.
Lunatics Unleashed, just everything. Like I ate that stuff up. But I've always kind of maybe I'm insecure, just not as confident, but I've always never been able to do what is done, if that makes sense. Like I play guitar, but I never wanted to learn other people's songs. Like I always wanted
Mhm.
to play my own stuff.
Mhm.
Like I wanted to draw, but I never necessarily like I was like, oh shit, my stuff doesn't look like Jim Lee. Like I don't look as
Mhm.
great as everybody else. So
Right.
nobody can tell me I'm drawing my stuff wrong. So let me just focus on trying to draw what I want to draw. And that
Word.
kind of came about as far as writing because when I did graduate with my bachelor's, I had a bit of like a crisis because it was like, oh my God, I'm about to start working. Do I really want to work? Like, do I really want to do
Mhm.
this? Like, is this really what I want? Is this about to be my life until I'm like 65? Like, to go into this office every day?
Mhm.
And like I really sat down and was like, all right, so what do I like to do? Like, what am I passionate about? And the thing that came up was comics. And it was like, 'cause when I was in middle school and high school, like I have sketch pads of stuff that, were ideas that I was developing. Like Snakebite, ironically, is one of those ideas from like '09. I have like an index card that's technically the first crumb of the idea.
Mhm.
But at the time, the protagonist was the villain. He would have been the villain of the story. So,
Got you.
I went back home to my mother's house and kind of dug through all that stuff and was trying to get it together as I was about to start my job, and I started making money, so I got distracted.
Mhm.
Well, maybe this isn't too bad. Like,
Right.
was enjoying doing the corporate thing and stuff like that. But it was always in the back of my mind. So always like watching TV and being like, well, no, they should have done this, or it would have been better if this, like, what if this happened? Or like, I wouldn't have wrote it that way. Like
Mhm.
telling friends, like, I'm sure anybody that's in the comics, like when you have friends that are casual fans, you're like, well, actually in the comics, this happened. So if I was this director, I would have done this, or they should have brought up
Mhm.
that obscure issue that no one else read but you, and you wish they would adapt it and things like that. So kind of always keeping, random sheets of paper or notes in my phone about different ideas. But when the pandemic hit, and that's when I really got fed up with work, and it was like, all right, I have money now. I have a decent amount that I can be able to get something going. So let me sit down. Let me write.
Mm,
I bought all the kind of how to write comic books that you can get. And I reached out to my mentor. Shout outs to him. His name's Greg Anderson, LSA. He has an indie book called Isnana, which is about Anansi. And
mhm,
I actually met him at a con and I had his card and I was like, all right, so I'm reading these books, but I don't know how to do this. Like, I need a mentor. I
mhm.
reached out to him. He kind of started coaching me, putting me on game, and kind of started introducing me to the way things are done and how to get things done. And I took it from there and put my book together. And since then, it's kind of been off to the races as far as like trying to get stuff out, trying to do cons to promote the book before I launch my Kickstarter, kind of doing collaborations because I have a friend that owns a streetwear brand. So I did a comic for him before this, and
Mhm.
just trying to get the wheels turning and get out there.
Dope, dope. Um, it's funny. I've seen It's Not the Were Spider. I haven't read it yet. Um, there's a couple of guys where I live. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina,
Mhm.
and they started an online shop, and they pretty much specialize in indie books by Black creators. So it's Nana, Harriet Tubman, Demon Slayer.
Shout out to my
Stuff like
man. He was at New York Comic Con. Like, I love those guys.
Yeah, man. So I mean, this book would be right up that alley, right? So we talked about Dogpile a little bit. I do want to talk about your other characters as well. So I guess we can start off with or continue with Adastra. Like, tell the people what Adastra's all about.
So I have a younger sister. And my younger sister, she hated cartoons, but
Hmm.
she's like big into like Disney Channel and like Teen Nick and like Degrassi sort of stuff. So you're kind of fighting over the living room TV. So I was always watching that stuff, and that book is like really inspired by that. Like, I like that stuff. Like, I couldn't help but like it after seeing so many episodes of That's So Raven and Hannah
Uh,
Montana. After
uh,
I liked it and I wanted to tell a story. And obviously, having several girlfriends and having a girlfriend that in particular was like into comics and anime and stuff like that. So I really wanted to write something because I had a bunch of ideas for stuff like that. So Adastra, to me, it's a story about perseverance. So, as people read the pitch, it's about a girl who literally, can be anything she wants. Like, she takes the concept of you being a teenager and hearing that, when you grow up, you can do anything and be anything you want. But she literally can do it. So it's, all the stresses that come with that while trying to manage a regular life and, kind of being a popular kid, being a middle child and kind of being into everything and, having all those choices and things like that.
got you. Got you. So I'm just scrolling through. Here's some of the pages from Adastra right here. Now, who's the artist on Adastra?
So my man, so shout outs to him. I love him to death. It's my guy Ronaldo, and super awesome dude. We actually, like I said, we did another comic together for one of my friend's brands. My friend has a streetwear brand called Barriers New York, and he did a sneaker for Converse. So me and Ronaldo put together a comic for that, and super nice guy, awesome to work with. Dynamite art. Like, literally, like, had the perfect feel because I wanted it to kind of feel like a Saturday morning cartoon as far as the
Yeah.
art style, and
Mhm.
be very welcoming, be girly but not too girly, so something that just everybody could gravitate to.
Dope, dope. Yeah, no, the art for Adastra caught my eye first. Because I love that cartoony stuff. Like, I read so many comics right now, and so much of what's coming out of the big two is like, let's see who can create the darkest story featuring these superheroes. And so when you see something like Adastra, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh snap, I want to read that. Like, let me read that real quick to kind of cleanse the palate and get a refresh. So I love stuff like that. Just want to give a shout out. My man Danny did back the campaign. Says good luck, brother Omari.
I
You'll be fine.
appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank everybody that's back in the campaign. We're at, I think, just over 2 bands so far. So, the goal is 5. So
Nice. So the stories are already done because you've created these in one shot form, and I've seen photos of image. Could you or images of you guys with the books? But could you tell the audience like what this campaign is going towards, like what them backing you is going to help you accomplish through these books?
So that's one thing that, being a fan first and supporting a bunch of Kickstarters, one thing that I wanted to do, and, obviously, kind of using my degrees and business knowledge, is I wanted to put out a product that, people would kind of get immediately, because I hate waiting and Amazon has spoiled me. So,
Right.
I spend my money on something I kind of want it as soon as possible. So it was important for me to kind of make sure that the book was ready,
Hmm.
and that, once people back it, they'd be able to get their copies, and, putting a little bit of a cushion in there, because each story is basically a pilot. So it's
Hmm.
basically a pilot. They're all one shots that give you a look into the world of the characters and what you can feel as far as like their full series. So I wanted to
Hmm.
give people a nice serving size to introduce them to the characters, get a feel of what they're going through and kind of who they are. So the campaign is going to go, all the money from the campaign is one going to go towards printing and putting out all the books that, people backed, and then any extra and like kind of the, little wiggle room and stuff is going to go towards funding the full series of all the books. So obviously I want to take them to full series, and I'm going to start from like day one, kind of before everybody gets their powers, to kind
Okay.
of explain how things are going and explain how we got to the point where eventually there will be a volume where it's like a dasher of, I don't know, 6 through 30, and it's
Hmm.
like, oh, here's where the one shot fits in, and like here's where this fits in, and some things I kind of wanted to leave some Easter eggs in for, the early fans, that, when they read this book, they'll hear this name and it's like, oh, that's that character that was mentioned here, and like, oh, that came up again, and things like that.
Got you. That's dope. Now, the Blacktooth publishing universe, right? Is this all interconnected? Do these characters cross over with each other? Are these pretty much independent stories?
So I'll say it's independent, and I'll say it's independent for now. Is I don't want to do anything forced. Being a big fan, and whether it's movies or TV or comics, is like everything's a shared universe. Everything's rely on everything, and everything matters. It's like I want to tell good stories first and foremost.
Right.
It's like I'm not gonna force Daquan to interact with Adastra. I'm not going to force O from Snakebite to interact with Daquan. If things organically happen, and I think of a story where, they'll, anybody will be good connecting with each other, then it'll happen. If not, it's whatever. For me, the anthology version kind of harkens back to what comics originally were, in the sense of like,
Hmm.
you think about Detective Comics, like Batman was just a story within Detective Comics that had nothing to do with the other comics in Detective Comics. Same thing with like Amazing Fantasy, and
Hmm.
a Spider-Man story, and then a bunch of other stuff with Tales of Suspense, or even, more modern stuff like the old Shonen Jump magazines. Like you have
Hmm.
Yu-Gi-Oh, Bleach, Naruto, just happen to be packaged together, but separately they were their own thing. So if it
Right.
happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. If a bunch of people scream at me and yell at me to tell me to do it, then it happens sooner than later. But for now, just good stories that are kind of in their own place.
Got you. So, if you guys are just tuning in, I'm here with Omari Malik, who's the founder of Blacktooth Publishing, and he's currently raising money in a Kickstarter for a book called Blacktooth Battalion, which is basically a trade paperback collecting three one-shot issues that he's already completed, featuring three original characters. So we have Adastra, we have Dogpile, and then this last one that we haven't talked about yet is Snakebite. Do you tell the people what Snakebite's all about?
Yeah, so Snakebite, I loved her movies. Like I'm like I've seen everything. Juice, Boys in the Hood, Jason Lyric, all those types of movies. So that's kind of influenced by that, and partially like, things that I see going on outside in Brooklyn, with like a lot of the, New York drill music, and as far as like what's happening and things like that. So it's really about a kid that, he's fresh out of juvenile detention. He's trying to change. He's obviously did things to lead him there, but he gets those him and his friends, they get a bunch of tattoos, and they think they're really cool, and they think, they're just, and he's using it as more so like, all right, so I'm gonna get these tattoos with my friends. This will kind of be my last shebang as far as like doing things badly and kind of living that old life, and I'm gonna
Hmm.
change. But little does he know that, those tattoos are gonna give him superpowers. So now his tattoos are giving him superpowers, but he still kind of has that pull of his friends trying to lead him down the wrong path, trying to bring him into the streets. And it's like now he has a little bit more power than he did before, but it's like also he's still on probation. Is he going to be better, or is he going to continue to do those same things? So
Word.
to me, it's almost like I related to like, that scene in Boys in the Hood where Trey has to decide to get out the car.
Hmm.
Or, Juice when it's like, Q really didn't want to go do the robbery after, he won his DJ competition. So, a coming of age story, a hood classic. Like if
Right.
there was ever a hood movie where it was like Menace to Society, but like they gave him superpowers, that to me is what Snakebite is.
That is great because I grew up on every hood movie ever that I probably shouldn't have been watching at that age.
Hey man.
So that works for me. I was like the kid that just got home and watched BET and like watched the terribly uh edited versions of these movies where they just throw random words into people's mouths. Like it's just great. But yeah, so Snakebite sounds dope just for that aspect alone. But you're right. I could see as you were saying like this, the idea for Snakebite kind of started with him being the antagonist, and like the snakes wrapped around him definitely does look like a villainous sort of look. So I'm definitely curious to see how this one goes. I might read that before I read Adastra.
Yeah,
But
like I said, man, I definitely want to hear the feedback from everybody. DM me on Instagram, comment on the Kickstarter page, tell me what you think, as far as, the pitches or for all the people that I've been selling to at cons, I've gotten a bunch of great feedback so far. So, if people back and then you get your book and you love it, I want to know.
word, who's this on art?
So on art, it's a guy named Moy R, and he has a colorist, kind of his personal colorist. So really nice guy. He's done some stuff for Marvel. So I wanted this one to have kind of the most traditional comic book style art.
Mhm,
So, like with Dogpile, it's kind of drawn like a manga. Like I
mhm.
said, Adastra kind of has the cartoony feel, but this one I kind of wanted it to have the most traditional kind of comic book art style.
Got you. And how would you say, like, and I like to ask this question because I feel like every indie creator has a different approach, but how is it like when you conceptualize these characters, but you have to rely on a different artist to sort of bring it to life? How is that collaboration process for you?
For me, I feel like I'm a little bit too anal. So it's like I've been told by my artists and then like different people in the industry and by my mentors that I brought a lot to the table as far as like having things together.
Mhm,
Being that I'm into fashion, being in New York and kind of being into the streetwear scene. So it's like I was putting together looks. So it's
mhm,
like as I was reaching out to my artists, to before I even started, doing the interiors, just getting turnarounds of characters done, I was sending things to artists like, all right, so here's a t-shirt reference. Like I want the shirt to look like this. I want the sleeves to kind of be rolled up a little bit. Like I want it to look like he has on compression pants. Like
mhm,
here are some colors. Like here's a zip file containing a color
mhm.
wheel of the colors I want you to use. Here's some references for pictures of like what I want the environment to look like and things like that. So I didn't really. I felt like my advice that I would give to anybody is kind of overindulge and say more than you need to say. That way, you're not going back and forth. So it wasn't ever a point where I felt like an artist wasn't really kind of getting me or didn't know what I was saying because I was sending so many reference photos of like what I wanted and like, all right, so I want the hair to look like this, like I want this to look like this, and things like that.
Got you. Yeah, that makes sense, right? For me, like, I wouldn't consider myself an artist, but if I was going to write a story, I would absolutely try to design the characters myself and then be like, all right, here's all these aspects that I want you to work with and don't go out of these borders. But, that's not how art works. You got to give some
So
freedom.
yeah, I mean, so that was the thing. Like, also giving artists like free reign as far as like once I kind of got down how I wanted the characters to look. Also giving artists like leeway as far as like, hey, so it's like when I was writing panels, it's like, all right, so I want this to happen, but it's like if you think you can tell it in less panels or more panels, send me a sketch and we'll discuss it from there. Like
Hmm.
not wanting to stifle anybody's creativity because at the end of the day you are partners, so you
Hmm.
want them to have that personal investment in the book. While like there have been plenty of moments where artists have sent me pages and I'm like, all right, like actually I'm gonna rewrite the script because you made it look way better because I had this for 7 panels but you said we only need 5 and you're
Right.
right, so let me cut out those 2 lines of dialogue that kind of don't matter and don't necessarily need to be there.
Hmm. Word. Word. So, my man Danny's getting at me, right? So, uh, we've had this conversation on the show plenty of times, but I don't like the Wiz. Like, It doesn't do it for me.
Is it a musical or?
It's not because it's a music. Well, I don't really particularly like musicals.
That's why I asked. A lot of people, ironically, like I said, my sister doesn't like cartoons. She's also a person that hates musicals.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of musicals. Like, if you can speak the dialogue, then don't give me a 5-minute song. But
That's the thing, man. If you know like musical theater, when the
mhm,
emotion is too great to talk, you sing. When it's too great to sing, you dance.
if that's one way to handle your problems, you know what I'm saying? Like, it worked for the dudes in the Beat It video. Like, it's cool.
So you've never seen Carmen, a hip hop opera.
I watched it once. I didn't like that one either. I didn't like Beyonce and Mekhi Phifer, but Beyonce's acting wasn't great back then. Well, it's still not great. So maybe that's why. I don't know. I'll try to revisit some of these things like I revisited The Wiz. But my issue with The Wiz is like decidedly for the stage. And it just doesn't translate, in my opinion, as well on screen. Like, I think The Wiz works great as a Broadway play, and I think it kind of should have stayed there. But it also was an issue of casting for the time. Like, it was just like a collection of stars that maybe weren't the greatest for their roles. Dorothy in particular. I have a laundry list of issues with The Wiz, but Danny is like, oh, you can't like Menace to Society and The Wiz, I guess. Which you
I
can like.
only give him credence because like I didn't notice this until I had like an ex-girlfriend point this out to me. But Kane's grandparents are in a completely different movie.
Word?
Rewatch Menace to Society and pay attention to the scenes when Kane is talking to his grandparents, and it's like, what are they doing? Why are they acting like this? Like it feels so like cardboarded and like they're in a one-shot play. Like it's if you rewatch it, just pay attention to their scenes and you're like, what are they doing? They're not in this movie.
I'll have to check it out, man. I'll have to check it out. Ilika says BJ the Beehive is gonna get you. Look, man, Beyonce is a very talented artist. Coffee Top Gun says he nearly missed the hangout. Look, guys, so we don't have a ton of time left on the interview, but I really wanted to make sure you guys got to see everything that this campaign has to offer. So, like I said, the Blacktooth Battalion is a collection of 3 already written stories: Snakebite, Adastra, and Dogpile. And so, as far as backing the campaign, you can back for as little as $10 and get a digital copy of everything that we just talked about tonight. And to get the one-shot book, all you have to pledge is $15.
Yeah, so just to tell people, like, one, you can buy the combined anthology version, or you can get the single issues that are just 15 for the physicals, and can't remember the prices off the top of my head. But if one pitch stands out to you versus the others, and you just want to rock with that one, by all means, I appreciate any support. Or you can take the gamble and get all 3. So I wanted to be flexible with people, because I was definitely, as much as I love Shonen Jump, there were a couple stinkers in there that I didn't necessarily always want. So people just want one, just want 2. I wanted to be flexible.
Word. I might have to back at the level to get this T-shirt.
Yeah, go for it, man. Yeah.
Because I have the trade. I don't have the single issues, but that T-shirt is dope. But I mean, you can back for as much as $150 and get a Kickstarter exclusive, which I believe is this one here on the bottom right.
Yep.
Okay, that's a dope cover. So yeah, you can back for as much as $150, get the ultimate bundle. You get volume 1 with the Kickstarter exclusive. You get digital and physical copies of the one-shots and a T-shirt, plus a special gift that I assume we don't want to spoil tonight on the interview.
Not yet. But
Okay.
These are all the people that I've given a book out to, from my man's ASAP Ill, Shane Oliver, Hood by Air, Scott Snyder,
dope,
Greg Capullos, Kirk Knight, Kirk Neasy on the beat,
word.
DMC, another St. John's of Love.
I was about to say DMC in the place to be. Goes to St. John's University.
My man Desto Dove.
Word.
Frank Miller the God.
That is crazy.
My man Q. Yeah, I have a very funny theory that Use, Love and Basketball, and Higher Learning are all the same movie.
They're in the same universe.
They're all the same movie. He's named Q in 2 of those movies, man.
That is funny. I didn't even think about that, but he is cute in two of those. That is great.
You know, Todd,
Man. That is dope.
Dr. Lee,
Yo, Static Shock
yeah, Phil Lamar,
and the Green Lantern.
you know, Chuck D,
Chuck D. That's crazy.
King Vader. So, like I said, the books, for people that I know, a lot of people tend to be like skeptical of
Hmm.
Kickstarters, but you know, the book is out there. Like I've been
Yeah,
I've been selling, I've been wheeling and dealing. Like people got this. This isn't one of those campaigns where it's like in 6 months you're like, all right, where's my book? Like once the campaign's done, shortly after, you know, books are gonna be sent out. Like I'm on top of everything. I'm doing Baltimore Comic Con for Halloween weekend, and then I'll be in Virginia in November just after the campaign is done, doing Richmond Comic Con, VA Comic Con. So
nice, nice. Yo, Ice T is in this photo gallery.
yeah, I
Great.
see too, man. Super nice guy.
Super dope. So the goal for this campaign is $5,000. We're just under halfway there, and the campaign ends next month. Looks like about the 15th of November or so. Um, so yeah, guys, definitely back the campaign if you feel so led after watching this interview and getting to know the characters a little bit. Like I said, I've read Dogpile and I really enjoyed it. So over the next couple of weeks, you guys are gonna hear me review the other two one shots in this series, and we'll keep it like that. But the art is great, the story is great, and Omari's trying to do something different. You know, like I think it's all about being true to yourself as an artist. And I think like no matter what your experience in life is, like there are people that can relate. So there are things in these books that I immediately relate to just because, I'm a black kid from North Carolina who grew up on hood movies, right? And so there may be some things that you relate to as well. So I encourage you to check out the campaign. And like I said, you can back at any level. You can back for as little as $10 and get digital access to all the stories. So there's really no excuse. Use the link. It's bjkicks.link/blacktooth. It'll be in the description of all the videos I do this month. And yeah, man. Was there anything else you wanted to say to the people before we end?
Man, just I appreciate the support. Please check it out. You know, show some love, show some support. If you go to my website, I have a Cash App too, and PayPal. Or if you don't want to buy the books, but you just want to help a brother out, you can do that too. And
Word.
shout out to BJ for having me on, man. We got to get on the other channel and do a sneaker battle, man.
Oh, we can do that. We can do that. Yeah. We can do. It's funny. I started the sneaker channel just because one of my homeboys was like, he had a pair of Yeezys on once, and I was like, "Yo, where'd you get those?" He's like, "Oh, now I buy UAs." I was like, "What the heck is a UA?"
Oh my
And it
god.
started down this whole rabbit hole. So he's like, "Well, yeah, if you got a YouTube channel, they'll just send you stuff." So it started with me. I was like, "All right, I might just do a couple videos on my comic channel and just kind of get a couple of sneakers." What I did not realize is how thirsty these sellers are for attention. So like all this behind me has been in the last like month and a half, just been like, hey, can you review our shoes? So I don't go anywhere. I go to church, the comic shop, and the grocery store. So it's like the chances of somebody calling out my fake sneakers are slim to none. Plus, I'm usually wearing slides anyway.
That's
So
me. I have a bunch of sneakers, but my most worn pair is a pair of dirty low top Chucks.
right,
Just bought Panda Babes, but it's like I've been wearing the dirty low top Chucks every day.
right. So it's just how it goes. But look, man, if you want to stick around, you absolutely can. We're going to talk about the DC Universe Infinite app and how they just leveled up their subscription and it's going to kill comic shops forever. It's not killing comic shops, but that's what people like to believe. So yeah, I mean, if you want to stick around, that's totally cool. I'm down.
For sure, man. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for having me. Shout outs to everybody. Make sure y'all are subscribing and following BJ. Follow me. Check me out. You know, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yo, no problem, man. Thanks again for stopping by, man.
You're the best, man.
Appreciate it, man. Peace.